Tyson, Republicans have been effective at weaponizing terms like woke to portray Democrats as out of touch or extreme. How do you think Democrats will respond without falling into that rhetoric trap?
You know, I think it's one of the things where you show by doing, because it's very easy to turn it into just word war and, you know, launch terms, accuse people of things, and that, I mean, it'll help you to an extent. You'll raise some money off that. You'll definitely excite your people. But for a lot of ordinary voters, it just goes over their heads. You know, they aren't following that day-to-day thing. And if you're just Trump light, then what's exciting about that? I can just go with Trump.
Can you elaborate on the term dark woke? What exactly does it mean?
I hesitate to almost call it like an inside joke, but it's basically like, so Democrats are woke, right? But now we're going to fight back and we're going to be mean. We're going to get into the mud with them. So we're dark woke. And it kind of just refers to, I would say, digital communications, like how people talk online. It's a reaction to losing. Every time you lose an election, it turns out all of your voters are very mad. And especially because Democratic voters really do not like Trump. And a lot of politicians, their inclinations will be like, oh, well, we just lost a popular vote. Maybe we need to do something different. Maybe we need to, you know, if not reach out, you know, we need to look responsible. Voters do not like that a lot of time, at least, you know, your base voters. They're like, no, I'm extremely upset. I want to, you know, you should be fighting this guy. We just had a whole election talking about how he's the worst person on the planet. And so we need to, you know, lead the fight. We need to lead the resistance. And, you know, we saw this a lot in the first term because people were very upset when, you know, Trump beat Hillary Clinton. And so, gosh, you know, famously, you know, a comedian posed with like Trump's like head in like a fake picture and stuff. So things got pretty wild back then. Now, though, we're calling it dark woke, and it's a new strategy that we're going to use to fight people. And I think it's a little bit silly, but also it's what happens when you have a dedicated class of communications consultants and staffers that are just online having to do something every day. And, you know, so they need to put punchy stuff out there. You have representatives, you know, candidates that are trying to get attention for their campaigns, trying to raise money, trying to show the Democratic brand is still, you know, viable. And the way you can break through this crazy news cycle and stuff is to, you know, say pretty aggressive things. It's, you know, there's probably some benefits to it, but I think as far as it only goes so far. You know, it's just, it can definitely get a bit silly.
Do you think that Democrats have a branding problem? And if so, how can it fix in this heavily polarized media environment?
Of course, I'm sure you've seen polls that show the Democratic Party is, you know, relatively, it's not popular at the moment. It's in the 30s, maybe low 40s or something like that. That is also very common whenever you lose an election. You know, hey, it turns out a lot more people voted for the other guy. You're probably not that popular, and it's probably not going to change very fast. The way that that's going to change is just by, in one sense, waiting for Republicans to mess up. That's just the nature of elections. You know, being in government always leads to some sort of mistake. And people being the fastest way to become unpopular is to become president. You know, it's just a kind of a slow thing down on that. And what Democrats can do is highlight the negative things that the Republicans are doing. You know, they're trying to cut health care for people. They're trying to cut taxes for the rich and for companies, you know, to pay for, well, they're trying to pay for it by cutting health care, by cutting food aid, food assistance. They're cutting charities funding for, you know, children, their education funding, all these sort of things. So you highlight what they're doing. You highlight the fact that Republicans, like from Donald Trump on down, appear to be making a lot of money off of being in power. You know, the Trump family now is a crypto coin that it seems like a lot of buyers abroad are the ones investing into it, which should raise a lot of questions. You highlight the things they're doing. You show that your voters that you are trying hard. And then eventually, when election time comes around, voters will probably respond. And it will be a mixture of responding to your positive message, but also negative, being turned off by what Republicans have done in power. Because a lot of what they want to do, polls show, are actually not very popular.
Do you sense that the Democrats need to reclaim or redefine woke, or you think they should abandon it entirely in the political discourse?
I don't think there's really much advantage to being, to trying to say like, oh, this is what woke is, this is what woke is. I mean, you're getting into that frame, you're playing that game. Most voters, there's been like relatively few polling on woke, especially in 2024 and 2023. For most people, it like didn't mean much. Or if it meant something, it was, Republicans automatically disliked it because they just hear it as a negative thing. And Democrats are like, well, it's probably fine or something like that. But generally, people want results. They don't want to see like word games. They don't, the cultural stuff is, well, it's probably a contribution to why Democrats became less popular. So I don't think you want to reclaim woke. What you want to do is reclaim, the party, or the Democratic brand.
How do you think that candidates can talk about racial or social justice in ways that unite rather than divide the country?
Most voters, whatever color you may be, whatever race, ethnicity, religion, some of them, they want the same things. They want jobs. They want economic security. They want to feel like they have an opportunity to get ahead. They want to, make sure they can provide for their children and, be able to go to school, that sort of stuff. So that's the way you appeal to them. There's been a lot of talk about how, Trump was one of the, probably made larger gains than any Republican, at least since maybe George Bush 1 or 2, with people of color in the United States, And that's probably because they resonate with sort of an economic message as opposed to, a very cultural, like, oh, you're this kind of thing, then you want this. Like, speak broadly, talk about popular things, hear what voters want. Don't think that just because a voter is X, that means they always want Y. And I think you'll get beyond that.
According to your view, what kind of coalition must Democrats build to remain competitive in rural America and among the non-college educated voters, the ones that have voted for Trump?
What kind of coalition? Well, you just need 50 plus 1, right? So at the end of the day, it's you make sure you get to your voters that are in, whether they be, college educated or not, and you just do enough to make sure that you drive up your margins among the voters that are outside of your traditional coalition. And there's very clear things you can do there. Like talk about rural America. The people that are going to be most hurt by a trade war are farmers, because that's like one of the biggest exports in America is agricultural goods, soybeans, corn, all that stuff. So you can very clearly show that like Trump is bad for you as a farmer, and that we as Democrats want to deliver for people that work in your industry, who want to support your way of life. Trump is cutting funding for rural health care, for rural education. A lot of stuff that happens outside of cities is subsidized by the federal government, to maintain level of services, rural air travel, and things like that. And that's all being, slashed willy-nilly by people like Elon Musk, who is, hardly is emblematic of cosmopolitan. He's very weird, but he's the richest man in the world is trying to take away health care from people in rural Iowa. It's not a good look, and I think if Democrats can talk about that. And, that sort of, as far as like getting that message out there, a lot of it just means going wherever possible to talk about it, being willing to go into rural areas, be in person, try to get on all kinds of media, traditional news, podcasts, digital outlets. It can be very hard to get people's attention because, like you said, it's such a crazy news environment. And the only way you can really take advantage of that is make sure your message gets onto every platform.
Now, talking about the younger generation, what do you think the younger voters want that the Democratic establishment doesn't fully grasp, don't really embrace?
Younger voters want to succeed. They want to feel like they have a chance, to get into the workforce, to get jobs. I mean, frankly, a lot of them want to become rich. But I think I saw a poll or survey, I don't know how scientific it was, and they're asked like entry-level salaries, well, not entry-level, but spiral salaries for different generations, And, millennials were like $150,000, $100,000 a year. And for Gen Z, it was like $500,000 a year. So, I do think there's a bit of making sure that you are a party of opportunity. It's not like, everyone gets to have a lottery ticket or something like that. But these are people at the very beginning of their careers. They want to feel like they have a chance to see. They don't want to argue about like different terms and stuff like that. They want to feel that they're not going to be layered with debt, that there's going to be chances out there. And so I think that's the best way to appeal to younger voters. I mean, you can offer very specific things. You can, student loan reform. That's somewhat popular with some groups. You can do, make sure healthcare is affordable and accessible. Try to crack down on scams and fees and stuff, things that really affect younger voters. But frankly, I really believe that broader economic messages, just telling everyone, hey, we have your back. We can make sure that like you're always going to be pointed upwards, and rising tide will lift a lot of boats. And I think people respond to that, and they respond to that better than very narrow targeted message like you like this because of it. And then just point out what Republicans want to do. They want to cut Social Security. They want to cut, Medicaid. These are things that people of all generations rely on. They want to cut the Affordable Care Act. At the end of this year, we're going to see one of the largest health care cuts in probably like a decade or two because of these expanded subsidies that give people health care just expire, and no one is doing anything about it. And it's going to lead to like a doubling of healthcare costs in a lot of states. So point that out. Republicans would rather cut rich people's taxes than deal with that.
Probably it's too early to call, but looking at Trump's approval ratings, how do you see the midterm elections will end up next November?
I believe, knock on wood, and famous last words, Democrats should feel relatively good about taking back the House. That usually happens. 2022 is very much the exception in holding back away, but even still, Republicans took back the House in 2022. The Republican majority is quite small, 5 to 6 members or something like that. So they should feel good about their chances as long as, Trump keeps being Trump and people remember he's actually not that good at being president and they don't like a lot what he does. And then just how turnout works in midterm elections, that's positive. The hard thing will be, can they take back the Senate? Can they limit their losses there? What can they do in state legislatures? What can they do for governors, mayors, and all that sort of stuff? So, we'll see. I think if everything keeps going the way it's going now, Democrats should be cautiously optimistic. And I think the more people see Trump, we've seen this before, the less popular he'll get. And frankly, a lot of Trump voters don't seem to vote when he's not on the ballot. We'll see if that changes for the first time in 2026. But I think things are looking okay.